My sister got a house for Christmas. I got a nod and a smile. But when Dad opened my gift, just a sheet of paper, he read the first line, looked at me, and whispered, "You didn't." Oh, but I did. This happened last Christmas, but I'm finally ready to tell this story. Some of you might think I went too far, but honestly, I don't care anymore. Let me give you some background first. I'm Sarah, 28, and I have a sister named Jessica who's 24. Growing up, Jessica was always the golden child. She was prettier, more outgoing, got better grades without trying, and somehow everything just came easier to her. Meanwhile, I was the awkward older sister who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Our parents, Robert and Linda, never tried to hide their favoritism. When Jessica wanted to go to a fancy private college, they paid for everything. When I wanted to go to college, they told me to take out student loans because it would teach me responsibility. When Jessica crashed her car at 19, they bought her a brand new one. When I needed a car for my first job, they co-signed a loan and reminded me monthly about the payments. But the real breaking point came 3 years ago when Jessica decided she wanted to be a life coach despite having 0 qualifications. She'd bounced between jobs since college, never keeping anything for more than 6 months. She'd moved back in with our parents twice, and each time they welcomed her with open arms while making passive-aggressive comments about how I should visit more often. I lived 2 hours away and came every other weekend. So when Jessica announced she was starting her life coaching business, my parents didn't just support her emotionally, they gave her $50,000 to invest in her future. $50,000? I had been trying to save up for a down payment on a house for years, working 60-hour weeks as an accountant, living in a cramped apartment, and eating ramen most nights. When I mentioned this to my mom, she said, "Well, Jessica's following her dreams. You have a stable job." The life coaching business failed within 8 months, exactly like I predicted. Jessica burned through that money on a fancy website, expensive certification courses that were basically pyramid schemes, and a lease on an office space she used maybe 10 times. But did my parents learn their lesson? Of course not. Fast forward to last summer. Jessica, now 25 and living with our parents again, decided she wanted to flip houses. She'd watched some HGTV shows and was convinced she had an eye for design. She found this rundown house in a decent neighborhood for $180,000. It needed everything: new plumbing, electrical work, a new roof, updated kitchen and bathrooms. Any rational person could see it would cost at least another $100,000 to make it livable, let alone profitable. But Jessica had a vision. She convinced our parents that this was her calling, that she'd learned from her previous mistakes, that this time would be different. She put together this whole presentation with Pinterest boards and spreadsheets that I'm pretty sure she had ChatGPT help her make. My parents ate it up. They not only agreed to loan her the money for the house, but they also promised to help with renovation costs. When Jessica worried about qualifying for a mortgage with her non-existent income and terrible credit, my dad offered to co-sign. When that wasn't enough, they decided to just buy the house outright as an investment property that Jessica could rent to own from them eventually. I watched this unfold with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Here was Jessica, who had never held a steady job, never finished a project in her life, and had literally just wasted $50,000, being handed another opportunity worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, I was still living in my cramped apartment, still saving every penny, still being responsible. The house purchase went through in August. Jessica moved into the house despite it barely being habitable, no air conditioning, sketchy electrical, and a bathroom that was basically unusable. But she was posting Instagram stories every day about her renovation journey and following her passion. Within a month, though, I noticed that Jessica was posting photos from Marcus's apartment across town more often than from her house. She'd still post renovation updates from the house, but her daily life seemed to be happening elsewhere. The problems started immediately. The contractors Jessica hired were clearly the cheapest she could find, not the best. The plumbing work they did in September had to be completely redone in October after a pipe burst and flooded the basement. The electrical work failed inspection twice. The roof repair was done wrong and leaked during the first rainstorm. Each time something went wrong, Jessica would call our parents in tears. Each time, they'd transfer more money. By November, they'd put in over $290,000 total, the house purchase plus renovations. And the house was still barely livable. I tried to talk to my parents about this during Thanksgiving. I pointed out, as gently as I could, that Jessica was in over her head. That maybe they should encourage her to sell the house as is and cut their losses. That maybe Jessica needed to face some consequences for once in her life. My mom's response? "Sarah, you've always been jealous of your sister. Just because you're too scared to take risks doesn't mean you should tear down someone who's trying to follow their dreams." That's when something snapped in me. I wasn't jealous, I was angry. Angry that my parents had given Jessica nearly $300,000 while I'd been working my ass off for years with zero help. Angry that they couldn't see how irresponsible and enabling they were being. Angry that pointing out obvious problems made me the bad guy. But I didn't blow up. Instead, I smiled and said I just wanted what was best for everyone. Then I went home and started planning. You see, there's something my family doesn't know about me. Remember how I said I'm an accountant? Well, I specialize in forensic accounting. I work for a firm that handles fraud investigations, bankruptcy cases, and asset recovery. I'm very, very good at following money trails and finding financial irregularities. Over the next few weeks, I started looking into Jessica's house project with a professional eye. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. First, the contractors Jessica hired weren't just cheap, they were operating without proper licenses for half the work they were doing. The electrical work that failed inspection twice? It wasn't just shoddy, it was dangerous and completely against code. Second, Jessica had been wildly inflating her renovation expenses to our parents. She'd ask for $15,000 for a bathroom renovation, then hire someone to do it for $8,000 and pocket the difference. She'd been doing this for months. Third, and this is the big one, Jessica had been lying about living in the house. She'd been staying there maybe 2 nights a week and spending the rest of her time at her boyfriend Marcus's apartment across town. I discovered this by checking social media posts, but I confirmed it by driving past the house at different times. Most nights, it was completely dark. This was important because Jessica had been claiming the house as her primary residence on several loan applications. She'd applied for and received a homeowner's insurance discount for owner-occupied properties. She'd even applied for a first-time homebuyers program grant from the city worth $10,000 by claiming it was her primary residence. But here's where it gets really interesting. In October, Jessica had quietly convinced my parents to transfer the house deed into her name, claiming it would help with contractor agreements and insurance issues. They agreed, thinking it would make the renovation process smoother. But what they didn't know was that Jessica immediately took out a $75,000 home equity loan against the house using falsified income documents. She'd used fake income documentation to get a loan against the house she now technically owned, while lying about it being her primary residence, and then spent that money on God knows what, definitely not renovations, because I could account for every legitimate expense. This wasn't just irresponsible or dishonest. This was fraud. Multiple types of fraud. I spent weeks documenting everything. I created a complete financial timeline showing every dollar my parents had given Jessica and where it had actually gone. I gathered evidence of the forged documents, the insurance fraud, the grant fraud, and the illegal home equity loan. The investigation became an obsession. Every evening after work, I'd come home to my cramped apartment and spread documents across my kitchen table like some kind of detective. I felt like I was living in a crime thriller, except the criminal was my own sister and the victims were my parents. I started by creating a detailed spreadsheet of every transaction. My parents had been keeping receipts, thank God, because they thought they might need them for tax purposes when Jessica eventually paid them back. Spoiler alert, she never intended to pay them back. I cross-referenced their records with bank statements I was able to access through some creative social engineering. Turns out Jessica had been sloppy with her financial security and used the same password for multiple accounts. The deeper I dug, the more horrified I became. Jessica wasn't just stealing, she was stealing systematically, with a level of planning that suggested this wasn't impulsive behavior. She'd created fake invoices from contractors who didn't exist. She'd photoshopped receipts to inflate costs. She'd even set up a fake LLC called Thompson Home Renovations to make it look like she was running a legitimate business. I found evidence that she'd been planning the home equity loan fraud for months. In July, she'd started researching how property transfers work and had even consulted with a sketchy attorney about asset protection strategies. The attorney's notes, which I obtained through a contact at a law firm that had done business with them, showed that Jessica had specifically asked about transferring property ownership without her parents' knowledge. But the most damning evidence came from Jessica's own digital footprint. She was incredibly active on social media, and she'd been documenting her lies in real time without realizing it. Instagram posts from September showed her at expensive restaurants and shopping sprees while she was supposedly living in a house without working plumbing. Facebook check-ins proved she'd been staying at Marcus's apartment most nights, despite claiming the house as her primary residence on multiple legal documents. I found credit card statements showing purchases that made my stomach turn. While my parents thought she was buying materials for bathroom renovations, Jessica had spent $3,200 at Nordstrom, $1,800 at a high-end salon, and $2,400 on what appeared to be a weekend spa retreat. She charged it all to a credit card that my parents were paying off, thinking it was for legitimate house expenses. The Europe trip was even worse than I'd initially documented. It wasn't just that she'd lied about it being a business conference, she'd actually forged documentation to support the lie. She'd created fake emails from a non-existent international property development summit and had even made a fake certificate of attendance. She'd spent the money on first-class flights, 5-star hotels, and Michelin-starred restaurants while my parents ate generic cereal for breakfast to save money for her business investment. As I compiled all this evidence, I started having doubts about what I was doing. Was I going too far? Was I betraying my family? But then I'd remember how my parents had treated me over the years, and how Jessica had manipulated them into destroying their financial security, and the doubts would disappear. I also started thinking about other people Jessica might be hurting. I did some research and found that she'd been advertising her life coaching services on Instagram again, even though that business had supposedly failed. She was charging people $200 per session for advice on achieving financial freedom and manifesting abundance. The irony was sickening. I found testimonials from 3 women who'd paid Jessica for coaching packages totaling $2,400 each. These were single mothers, recent divorcees, people who clearly couldn't afford to waste money on Jessica's fake expertise. One woman had borrowed money from her own mother to pay for Jessica's wealth manifestation intensive. Another had put the charges on a credit card that was already maxed out. This wasn't just about my family anymore. Jessica was actively scamming vulnerable people while committing fraud against banks and insurance companies. She'd become a serial financial predator, and my parents' enabling had made it possible. I decided to expand my investigation to include the life coaching scam. It didn't take long to find more victims. Jessica had been running the scam through multiple platforms and had developed an elaborate system of fake testimonials and stolen content. She'd been copying and pasting motivational posts from successful life coaches and presenting them as her own insights. The fake testimonials were particularly disturbing. Jessica had created entire fake personas, complete with stock photo profiles and made-up success stories. Sarah M. from Denver had supposedly increased her income by 400% after working with Jessica. Jennifer L. from Phoenix had supposedly met the love of her life and started her dream business. These people didn't exist, but real people were paying Jessica based on these fake success stories. By early December, I documented evidence of Jessica defrauding at least 8 people out of more than $15,000 through her fake coaching business. I'd also found evidence that she was planning to expand the scam. She'd been researching how to create online courses and had started reaching out to bigger platforms about selling her proven system for financial success. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Jessica was teaching people how to achieve financial freedom while she was literally stealing money from banks, insurance companies, government programs, and her own parents. She was advising people on manifestation and positive thinking while systematically lying to everyone in her life. I started having trouble sleeping. Every night, I'd lie in bed thinking about all the people Jessica was hurting, all the money she was stealing, all the lies she was telling. I'd think about my parents, who still believed their daughter was just struggling to find her way in life. I'd think about the single mothers paying Jessica for advice they'd never get, and the contractors who'd never be paid for work they'd already done. The worst part was that Jessica seemed to genuinely believe she was the victim in all of this. Her social media posts were full of inspirational quotes about overcoming obstacles and staying positive in the face of adversity. She'd post about haters who didn't understand her vision and family members who weren't supportive of her dreams. She was crafting a narrative where she was the brave entrepreneur fighting against a world that didn't believe in her. But I knew the truth. Jessica wasn't a dreamer or an entrepreneur. She was a criminal who'd figured out how to weaponize our parents' love and guilt to fund her lifestyle. She turned emotional manipulation into a business model, and it was working perfectly. The final straw came in mid-December when I discovered that Jessica had been forging my signature too. She'd applied for a small business loan using me as a reference, claiming that I'd agreed to co-sign if needed. She'd forged documents showing that I'd reviewed her business plan and supported her loan application. Fortunately, the bank had called me to verify, and I'd been able to stop it before any money changed hands. But the fact that she tried to drag me into her web of fraud made it personal in a new way. It wasn't just that she was stealing from our parents or scamming strangers, she was actively trying to destroy my credit and my reputation to support her lies. That's when I decided that a Christmas revelation wasn't enough. Jessica needed to face real consequences, and the people she was hurting deserved to know the truth. I started putting together not just one report, but a comprehensive case file that could be used by prosecutors, insurance investigators, and anyone else who needed to hold Jessica accountable. I reached out to some of the women who'd been scammed by Jessica's coaching business. It was heartbreaking to hear their stories. Michelle, a recent divorcee, had paid Jessica $2,400 for a life transformation package that promised to help her rebuild her finances and find new love. Jessica had ghosted her after 2 sessions, claiming she was dealing with a family emergency and would reschedule soon. That was 3 months ago. Another victim, Amanda, had borrowed money from her retirement account to pay for Jessica's services. She was 52, had just lost her job, and was desperate for guidance on starting over. Jessica had convinced her that she could help her launch a successful consulting business within 6 months. Instead, Jessica had given her generic advice copied from business blogs, and then disappeared when Amanda started asking for specific help with her business plan. These women weren't just out money, they were out hope. They trusted Jessica during vulnerable moments in their lives, and she'd exploited that trust for easy cash. Some of them were embarrassed to admit they'd been scammed, which made Jessica's crimes even more insidious. By mid-December, I had a file that would make any prosecutor salivate. Jessica had committed enough financial crimes to potentially face years in prison. And she'd done it all while stealing from our parents and lying to their faces. The question was, what to do with this information? I thought about confronting Jessica directly, But I knew she'd just lie and manipulate like she always did. I thought about telling my parents, but they'd probably find a way to excuse her behavior and blame me for attacking my sister. That's when I decided on the perfect Christmas gift. I put together a complete report. Think of it like the kind of thing I'd prepare for a client who suspected embezzlement. It was professionally formatted, meticulously documented, and absolutely devastating. I included copies of all the forged documents, bank records showing the fraudulent loan, evidence of insurance and grant fraud, and a detailed timeline of Jessica's lies. The first page was a simple executive summary that read, Financial crimes committed by Jessica Marie Thompson in connection with property located at 847 Maple Street. This report documents evidence of bank fraud, insurance fraud, and grant fraud totaling approximately $85,000 in illegal activity, not including the estimated $290,000 in funds obtained from Robert and Linda Thompson under false pretenses. I had the report professionally bound and put it in a manila envelope. That was Jessica's Christmas gift from me. Christmas morning arrived, and it started exactly like I expected. Jessica was there with Marcus, talking loudly about her renovation projects and showing everyone pictures on her phone. My parents were beaming with pride, talking about how brave and entrepreneurial she was. Gift opening time came, and it was the usual show. Jessica got expensive clothes, jewelry, gift cards, and then the big finale, a framed certificate declaring the house officially hers, free and clear. Even though the deed had been transferred months earlier, my parents had kept it secret and wanted to make a big announcement that they were forgiving the loan and giving her the house as an outright gift. Jessica cried, fake tears, obviously, and hugged them and went on about how this was the best gift ever and how she'd make them so proud. Everyone was taking pictures and making a huge deal about it. Then it was my turn. My parents handed me a card with a $200 gift certificate to Target and said something about how they knew I was practical and would appreciate something useful. Jessica didn't get me anything, which wasn't surprising. Finally, it was time for me to give my gifts. I handed out normal presents to everyone else, nice but nothing special. Then I saved Jessica's gift for last. This is for you, Jess, I said, handing her the manila envelope. I put a lot of work into this. Jessica looked confused but opened it anyway. She pulled out the bound report and started reading the first page. I watched her face go from confused to pale to absolutely panicked in about 30 seconds. What? What is this? She stammered. Keep reading, I said calmly. It's all there. My dad took the report from Jessica's shaking hands and started reading. The room got very quiet very fast. I watched his face go through the same progression as Jessica's, but with more anger mixed in. When he got to the part about the forged documents and fraudulent loan, he looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before. You didn't, he whispered. Oh, but I did, I replied. What followed was the most epic family meltdown I've ever witnessed. Jessica immediately went into denial mode, claiming I had made everything up, that I was jealous and trying to ruin her life. But the evidence was overwhelming and professionally documented. You can't fake bank records and forged signatures. Marcus tried to defend Jessica at first, but when my dad started reading some of the specifics out loud, like the fact that Jessica had spent $23,000 of the home equity loan money on a trip to Europe that she claimed was a business conference, even he went quiet. My mom kept saying there had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding. But as my dad read more of the report, her denials got weaker and weaker. The breaking point came when my dad got to the section about the insurance fraud. Jessica had filed a claim for water damage that had supposedly happened in November, claiming it was due to a burst pipe. She'd received a $12,000 payout from the insurance company. But I documented that the water damage was actually from a leak that had existed since August, before she'd even taken out the policy. She'd lied about when it happened to make sure it was covered. $12,000, Jessica, my dad said, his voice shaking with rage. You stole $12,000 from an insurance company and committed fraud to do it. That's when Jessica finally broke down and admitted to some of it. Not all of it, she tried to minimize and make excuses, but enough that even my mom couldn't deny what was happening anymore. The house deed ceremony that had been the highlight of the morning suddenly took on a very different meaning. My parents realized they'd just publicly announced that they were gifting Jessica a house that she'd been using to commit crimes. Even though the legal transfer had happened months earlier, they just made themselves look like willing participants in her fraud. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. My mom started hyperventilating and had to sit down. My dad's face went from red with anger to gray with shock as the full implications hit him. They'd just given Jessica legal ownership of a property that was about to be at the center of multiple criminal investigations. We have to call the lawyer, my dad said, his voice shaking. We need to understand what we've gotten ourselves into. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Even though they transferred the deed months ago, their public announcement of gifting her the house made them look like willing participants in her scheme. Jessica had stopped trying to deny everything and had moved into full panic mode. She kept saying she could explain everything, that it wasn't as bad as it looked, that she'd just made some mistakes. But every time my dad read another section of the report out loud, her explanations got weaker and more desperate. The fake contractor invoices, Jessica, my dad said, his voice getting louder. You created fake companies. You made up people who don't exist and charged us for work they never did. How do you explain that? I was just trying to keep track of expenses, Jessica stammered. I thought it would be easier to organize things if you stole $43,000 using fake invoices, my dad interrupted. $43,000, Jessica. That's not organizing expenses. That's theft. My mom was crying now, but they weren't tears of sympathy for Jessica. They were tears of realization. She was finally understanding that her baby girl had been systematically stealing from them for months while looking them in the eye and lying about it. And the insurance fraud, my dad continued, flipping through the report. You filed a false claim and collected $12,000 for damage that happened before you even had coverage. Do you understand that's a felony? Do you understand you could go to prison for this? Jessica's boyfriend Marcus had been getting quieter and quieter as more details came out. When my dad got to the section about the Europe trip, how Jessica had spent $23,000 of stolen money on luxury travel while claiming it was a business conference, Marcus finally spoke up. Wait, he said, looking at Jessica with confusion. You told me your parents paid for that trip as a birthday gift. Another lie exposed. Jessica had been lying to everyone, including the people closest to her. She told Marcus one story, our parents another story, and her social media followers a third story. She'd been living multiple false narratives simultaneously. I can explain that too, Jessica said weakly, but she couldn't. There was no innocent explanation for forging conference documentation and stealing money for a luxury vacation. My dad kept reading, and each new revelation was worse than the last. The life coaching scam particularly infuriated my mom, who'd spent years bragging to her friends about Jessica's coaching business and how proud she was of her daughter's entrepreneurial spirit. You were charging people $2,000 for fake coaching while stealing money from us to pay for it, my mom said, her voice breaking. Those poor women trusted you. They believed in you. I was helping people, Jessica protested. I was giving them hope and motivation. You were giving them nothing, I said calmly. You were copying and pasting content from other people's websites and pretending it was your own expertise. You were selling hope to desperate people while providing literally nothing of value in return. The room went quiet except for my mom's crying and the sound of my dad turning pages. We all knew there was more. The report was thick, and he was only halfway through. Marcus quietly left while Jessica was sobbing and confessing. Smart guy. The rest of Christmas was spent with my parents trying to figure out how much legal trouble Jessica was in and how much money they could recover. The answer to both questions was a lot and not much, respectively. But here's the thing, I wasn't done. The Christmas revelation was just the opening move. I had prepared for this moment carefully, and I knew exactly what needed to happen next. The day after Christmas, while my parents were still reeling from the revelation, I made the calls I'd been planning for weeks. I also contacted the insurance company's fraud investigation unit, the city department that handles grand fraud, and the bank that had issued a fraudulent home equity loan. By New Year's Eve, Jessica was facing potential criminal charges for multiple felonies. The insurance company was demanding their money back plus penalties. The city wanted their grant money returned. The bank had frozen the fraudulent loan and was pursuing civil action. Jessica hired a lawyer with money she didn't have. She had to borrow it from Marcus's parents, apparently. The lawyer's advice was simple: pay everything back immediately and hope the prosecutors would be lenient. But Jessica didn't have the money to pay back $85,000 plus penalties and interest. The only significant asset she had was a house, which was still a construction disaster and worth maybe $200,000 in its current condition. My parents faced a choice: let Jessica go to prison and lose everything, or bail her out again. This time, though, it meant selling their own house, the house they'd lived in for 30 years, the house they'd planned to retire in. They chose to save Jessica. They sold the family home and moved into a small apartment. The proceeds paid off Jessica's fraud debts and legal fees, with just enough left over for a basic down payment on the apartment. Jessica had to sell the disaster house at a massive loss. After paying off all the legitimate contractor debts and liens, she walked away with nothing. She moved in with Marcus, but that relationship didn't last long. Apparently, dating a felon who destroyed her family's finances wasn't as appealing as he'd initially thought. As for me, I bought a house 8 months later. A nice house, with money I'd saved through years of hard work and responsible financial decisions. My parents didn't contribute a dime, but then again, they didn't have a dime left to contribute. Some people have told me I went too far. That I should have tried to handle this privately, within the family. That I destroyed my parents' retirement and my sister's future. But here's what I think: Jessica destroyed our parents' retirement by stealing from them. Jessica destroyed her own future by committing multiple felonies. I just documented it and made sure there were consequences. For 28 years, I watched my parents enable Jessica's irresponsible behavior while expecting me to be the mature, responsible one. I watched them give her hundreds of thousands of dollars while telling me to figure things out on my own. I watched them make excuses for her failures while criticizing me for not taking enough risks. The truth is, if I hadn't exposed Jessica's crimes, she would have kept going. The fraud would have gotten bigger. More people would have been hurt. Eventually, it all would have come out anyway, but by then the damage would have been even worse. At least this way, Jessica faced consequences when the crimes were still relatively small. At least this way, my parents found out the truth before they lost even more money. Do I feel bad about it? Sometimes. I feel bad that my parents had to sell their house. I feel bad that they trusted Jessica and got betrayed. I feel bad that our family will never be the same. But do I regret it? Not for a second. Jessica is working as a waitress now, trying to rebuild her life. She's in therapy and claims she's learning to be more responsible. She's also completely cut off from our parents financially. They made that a condition of not pursuing additional civil action for the money she stole from them directly. My parents and I have a complicated relationship now. They're hurt and angry that I didn't come to them first. They feel like I ambushed them and destroyed the family. But they also can't deny that I was right about Jessica, and they can't deny that they treated me unfairly for years. We talk occasionally. Awkward phone calls every few weeks, brief visits on holidays. It's not the warm family relationship I always wanted, but it's honest in a way it never was before. Sometimes my mom will make comments about how I could have handled things differently, how I should have given Jessica a chance to make things right. But we all know Jessica had dozens of chances to make things right, and she chose to lie and steal instead. The last time I saw Jessica was at a coffee shop about a year ago. It was awkward, obviously. She looked tired and older than her 26 years. She asked if I was happy now that I'd ruined her life. I told her I didn't ruin her life, I just stopped her from ruining other people's lives. Then I left. I know some of you reading this will think I'm cold or cruel. That families should forgive and support each other no matter what. That I should have found a way to help Jessica instead of destroying her. But here's what I learned: enabling someone isn't the same as helping them. Covering up their mistakes isn't the same as supporting them. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is make sure there are real consequences for destructive behavior. Jessica had to face the truth about herself for the first time in her life. She had to experience real consequences for her actions. She had to learn that charm and tears and manipulation wouldn't save her from everything. Was it brutal? Yes. Was it necessary? I believe it was. My parents had to face the truth about their parenting too. They had to confront the fact that their favoritism and enabling had created a person capable of stealing from them without hesitation. They had to admit that their tough love approach with me and their supportive approach with Jessica had been fundamentally unfair. As for me, I finally stood up for myself. I finally said enough to years of being treated like the less important child. I finally made it clear that being responsible and hardworking deserved respect, not dismissal. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. The best Christmas gift I ever gave was the truth. And the best Christmas gift I ever received was the knowledge that I'd never again have to pretend that blatant favoritism and financial abuse were just family dynamics that I needed to accept. Some families are built on love and mutual respect. Others are built on lies and enabling and dysfunction. When you're in the second kind of family, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is burn it down and see what, if anything, can be built from the ashes. I'm still building. We'll see what happens.